Is it okay?
Go ahead, we'll see.
Yeah. We always talk about being conscious. Conscious in the body. Is it any particular part of the body, or just being conscious where the movement is like, when the feeling, you're always conscious of this part. That when you're thinking, the consciousness seems to be going to this part, you're thinking. So is that the way to do it?
Well, it's like consciousness in the Western world, we tend to think of it as in the brain, and we identify consciousness with thinking or with the sensory perceptions. But awareness, mindfulness, means that, like when you're mindful, you're not necessarily thinking, but you're conscious, and so that the body is in the consciousness rather than the consciousness in the body. Like in the Western attitude, the consciousness is inside the body, where with the Buddhist, body's in consciousness. So consciousness isn't personal. It's not about your consciousness or that we're separate. We're separate consciousnesses. The separation comes with the conditions, like you identify with your body, makes you separate from me. And when I think of myself as a condition, as a person, in any form, then it tends to separate, like I'm here and you're there. But in consciousness, it's unitive. It's a oneness that we can begin to, when we see that in nature itself, in the animal world, the kangaroos and the wombats. I mean, consciousness, the forms are different, like you have a human form, and so you have the karma of a human being. And so this is why you're a Buddhist, why you can meditate, why you can understand Dhamma, because of the human condition has this kind of Buddha nature, or Buddha mind, as they say, where we can reflect on the present moment. The animal kingdom doesn't seem to do that. Their intelligence is from the instinctual level, survival level, procreative level, but to reflect on that, they can't do it. But because, like, you can get angry just like a cat or a dog can get angry, but then I can say, well, observe the anger, and you can actually observe, you're angry. That which is aware of the anger isn't angry, that's consciousness. The emotion you're feeling you might call that anger, and then out of habit you think, I'm an angry person, rather than just seeing that it is a condition, a sankhara, rising, ceasing. This is a reflective, this is what Buddha is about. But like when the cat gets angry, it just becomes an angry cat. And yet the consciousness isn't separative, but the species, the form, the karma is different. It's very important, because we're Western civilization very much fixed on the idea of consciousness being within the body, and oftentimes connected to the thinking process. I've heard on Radio 4 in England, psychologists and scientists talk about that, even suggesting dogs aren't conscious because they don't think. And that seems to me to be preposterous, because one thing is a dog, cat, the kangaroo, whatever, is a conscious form. And but if you if you relegate consciousness to thinking, then that comes from within. Your thoughts are going to be different from my thoughts at this moment. But in terms of consciousness, the same. And that gives you a sense of compassion for nature. You feel connected. It's a connection with nature that, when we destroy nature, when we just kill and exploit nature for our own benefits, this comes from the idea that I'm a separate being and these are all objects that aren't important enough. Like the animal world is there for me to eat, or however you want to put it. But when you begin to have the more holistic approach of consciousness, then it helps you respect environmental conditions, the planet itself, the animal world. And like in the monastic structure that we're in the monastic sangha, it's very much, we can't intentionally destroy any living creature. And so, when I first ordained, there's a lot of mosquitoes in Thailand that bring up desires to kill them. But you're not supposed to harm them, So, I could observe the old habit of wanting to get rid, kill them because they spread malaria. They're mousy little creatures. But when you reflect on the fact that they're a separate form, but consciousness is the same, you feel a different way toward them than if you just see them as annoying creatures that you would like to get rid of totally. And so it's learning to trust in your awareness that you see the end of suffering.
When you talk about consciousness, awareness, reflection, contemplation, and all that, so I don't know whether I got it right or not. Because, when you're conscious, are you just conscious without understanding, just being conscious, pure conscious of what happened? Or,
What is it?
I think Peg is still a bit uncertain about any difference between consciousness and awareness, the different words we use.
Awareness is really just access to, it's where we are aware of being conscious, like consciousness recognizing itself, like the third noble truth is the cessation of suffering and nirodha. And Lumpur Dun, famous Thai Ajahn, his interpretation of the third noble truth is jit and jit, meaning like consciousness knowing itself. Like you're conscious, even a serial killer or a criminal or that is conscious. But he or she sees the world in terms of emotional likes and dislikes and habit forms. But with meditation, then your consciousness is aware of it, of being awakened to the reality of consciousness. This is like enlightenment. This is awakenedness rather than just. So you can't take it personally. It's no longer coming from identity with memories or thoughts, but it's certainly a powerful insight into reality. So awareness, Like you've got sati, then in Pali you've got sati, sampajanya, awareness, mindfulness, intuitive awareness is what I describe sampajanya, or it's the apprehension, it's where the awareness isn't focused on an object anymore, but embracing the moment. Like you're aware when you drive the car or cross the street, you have to be aware of the things around you to safely go across and not get hit by a car. And that's because of your intelligent survival mechanisms are working. You know the dangers of that particular situation. But in the safety of your home, where there's no immediate dangers, then we can create all kinds of mental problems, worries, anxieties, fears about the future, or guilt and remorse about things of the past, and we become neurotic. We create a whole scenario of misery just through thinking in a situation where it doesn't demand personal safety, in the safety of your own home. Where when you're climbing a rock cliff, you have to really be aware of where your hands are, where your feet are. That takes incredible mindfulness, but then the situation demands that. When you're climbing a rock cliff, you can't worry about the electricity bill. You got to know where your hands and feet are, and the nature of the cliff you're on. Where like in so much of life here in Australia is you've got a good government and safety, and you own your own home, and you have all these safety measures. Basically it's a society where criminality, killing other human beings, robbing banks, and that is a criminal offense. So there's a lot of things we can take for granted because the externals seem fairly safe. But that's where in affluent societies so many problems are neurotic ones, self-created through worry, through anxiety, through self-criticism, through guilt. And this is, like monastic sangha we're not living in, we kind of make ourselves, the actual form of a bhikkhu, shaven head, bare feet, wearing robes. You're taking away the very masculine necessities of being a warrior and protecting the family and killing the enemy and saving the damsel from the demon and so forth. So usually power figures, for when you want to use symbols for power, you have very muscular men with a sword or a gun, and that has a certain effect on consciousness because it means power, and in a world where there's a lot of danger and enemies and unsafety, where the bhikkhu form is taking away those symbols of power and diminishing them, so that it's an attempt to depersonalize the self, like we're all from different cultural backgrounds, different characters, different races, and so forth. So we can emphasize our age or our cultural background, whether we're upper class or working class or whatever. But in the Bhikkhu Sangha, whether you're a prince in lay life or a beggar, you're wearing the same robe, shave the head in the same way. that has an effect on your consciousness. When you see a Buddhist monk, it's like an archetype. It seems even in a country like in Australia or UK, it has an effect on people that may not know anything about Buddhism. I found that living in England for so many years that I never wanted to change the outward form because you realize the power of the archetypal appearance of like the Buddha, like the Buddha Rupa is an idealized, iconic form of a bhikkhu. So we wear the same kind of robe and style as they create in Buddhist icons. But notice also how things affect you. How symbols, how what you see has effect on your citta, on your consciousness. Because we're sensitive forms. This is about this realm we're living in. It's about sensitivity, and it's totally sensitive. And when you think of it, sometimes it's a bit terrifying because you realize from birth to death you are in this very sensitive state. So many things coming at you, through seeing or hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and then the thinking process. We have retentive memory, so we remember all kinds of things. Usually, we don't remember the ordinary things of the past. We remember the great successes or the great failures. So, you don't remember what you had for lunch last year on this day, unless it was the best meal you've ever had or it made you terribly sick. So most memory is lost in terms of the ordinariness of life, but we remember, the successes and failures of the past. And therefore we can be happy or sad. I remember as training as a monk in Thailand, where to make myself happy, I'd remember I remember happy experiences as a child or as a youth. It kind of cheers you up. And then the story about suddenly realizing, I was in my kuti when there's a hot season in Thailand, and Wat Pah Pong, and I was bored. It's very hot there, and then and you just feel so enervated and weak and negative. And I started thinking about something that happened when I was in the Navy, which it was about 25 years before that, and just this memory of this unpleasant experience in the military. I started feeling angry and indignant, and I started developing this anger and resentment and indignation, just remembering something that happened 25 years before, and nothing to do with Wat Pah Pong or the situation I'm in. And suddenly I thought, what am I doing? That's only a memory arising now, and then I'm arousing energy through holding on to this memory, and I can wind myself up into a state of real strong indignation, wanting to go and find that person that caused me the suffering. And then you realize nothing to do with the present moment, except that a memory that comes up, and then I grasp that memory and I become an indignant Buddhist monk over what? Over a memory. There's no reason to feel that anger anymore because it was 25 years before the incident. There's a way, like reflecting like this. This is a good practice to just observe, not to, to try to understand how the human mind works and how we do create our suffering through attachments to conditioned phenomena.
You also said about trusting your intuitive awareness or gut feel. But sometimes we do doubt our gut feel whether we make the right judgment. So what do we do about that?
When we doubt about the decisions we make, when we judge something, then we follow that up with a doubt. How should we deal with that?
Well, the thinking, grasping thought, the blind grasping of thinking always leads to doubt. And that, like people that think a lot, doubt a lot, and then making decisions, you kind of, one feels you're in a position where people are looking to you to make a decision. Oftentimes you feel the pressure from the boss or from the wife or from the neighbors and whatnot, and you feel you have to make a decision. And sometimes in that, without being aware of what's actually happening, you tend to make a decision, and then maybe it isn't the right one. Because you've done it out of the thinking process and maybe arbitrarily choosing one over another, where I've found that a lot of decisions come naturally if you don't get caught up in trying to arbitrarily choose between A and B in some arbitrary way. If you kind of just let them go for a while, then you have an insight into what is the proper decision. It's coming from an insight level rather than just from pressure from outside or your own tendency to feel you've got to choose one or the other. Because if you do that, then you inevitably doubt whether it was the right decision. I've been through this so many times. And when we acquired, when we decided the English Sangha Trust to purchase what Amaravati, and I thought, we'd have to borrow money and things like this, and I'm not a worldly person, so I don't know much about finance and all that. So I started worrying, and is this the right decision, or is this maybe better not get it, because you don't know what the future will bring, and it could be a mistake. And you get caught up in this doubt. And several nights before we actually signed the papers, I went through this terrible doubt and just wanted to back out and even run away from England. But then seeing this in myself, I said, I intuitively trusted that this was to buy this property was the right decision. It was an intuition. It wasn't based on just personal feelings. So it worked out very well, actually. In fact, I went to live in England in 1977, and properties were relatively inexpensive then. And when we lived in London for 2 years, and because the English Sangha Trust owned a house in London, so we lived there. But like Luang Por Chah, the whole agreement was to move out to establish a forest monastery in the UK. And that's what I went to England for, was to do that. So we looked for properties when we were in London, and Chithurst is in West Sussex, and that's a very expensive area, you know. So in terms of property, it's very desirable. It's very beautiful, pretty countryside, and so we just, when we were figuring out where we could possibly set up a forest monastery, we dismissed West Sussex, Hampshire, and that is too beyond our means, and so we looked in Wales. I remember spending a couple of weeks in Wales looking for properties, and in Somerset, in Devon, places that properties were not particularly expensive and not too far away from London. And then we acquired this story about Lumpur Cha told us to go on alms round every day. So we lived in Hampstead, in Belsize Park, and we'd walk up to Hampstead Heath, and in 1978 we met a jogger, Englishman, who was jogging, and he stopped us and asked what we were, and he ended up giving us the forest, the Hammer Wood in Chithurst, like a free will offering. So here we were in West Sussex, kind of very desirable, you know, not too far away, about 50 miles from London, and it was just like a, you know, dream come true, because it's a very beautiful monastery, forest monastery. And yet during that time, those 2 years we lived in London, they were trying to buy properties, and we had to sell the property in Hampstead to buy the property in the countryside, and we still, you know, either we couldn't sell the place in Hampstead in time to buy the property. We found a very nice place in Somerset. This would really make a nice forest monastery. And then somebody flew over from France, a wealthy man, and purchased the property before we could sell the Hampstead. And so you go through these disillusioning experiences, and I remember feeling, we're going to be stuck in London the rest of my life, you know. But then things happen, you know, that you can account for in your reasoning mind now. You can't count on meeting somebody who will give you a forest in Sussex. That thought never occurred to me. You know, it never was an expectation or even a possibility, but things do happen. And the same with Amaravati in Hertfordshire, because in Chithurst, within 5 years the Sangha had grown so much we didn't have any more room to have more monks or nuns there. We couldn't accommodate anymore, so I had to think about expanding. And then I thought, you know, to find a place north of London would make it easier for so many people, because in those days it was very difficult to cross, to drive from the north of London across London to West Sussex. Now they have the M25, you know, makes a big orbital motorway around London, but that was in the process of being built at the time. But and then these friends found Amaravati in Hertfordshire, which is one of the home counties. So I became known as very savvy, very a good businessman and buying properties in England. And then a year after we acquired Amaravati, in 1985, all the properties quadrupled in price, like in Great Gaddiston or in that part of, because they finished the orbital motorway. And then Hemel Hempstead, Berkhamsted, these towns north of London became very, people wanted to move out of London would look for properties in this area. So I trust in this I learned from Luang Por Chah, is that, you can't figure everything out and get it right. There's a certain amount of trust you have to put in what you're doing, and then see what happens, whether it succeeds or fails. And then the future is always the unknown, so it's always uncertain. Tomorrow, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? and that uncertainty is doubt. It's the nature of life. To be caught in this sense of not knowing, but wanting to know, like so much of the security we find in modern society is based on making us feel secure, making us feel safe, and that everything's going to be okay. And so we have the illusion of safety and security that the society tries to provide, if it's a benevolent society. But it's still the same. It's still uncertain, insecure. It's the nature of existence.
We'll probably leave the talk there for today, if it's the time for a meal. If you'd like to make your way downstairs and begin the bathroom.